English translation 911th contact. Monday, 19th May 2025, 15:26 hours.
Pleased to see you. Welcome, Quetzal, my friend.
It has also been a long time for me, as habit might make itself felt if we are unable to speak for a long time. But it was necessary that I had to return to Erra, because the 2 attacks on you last month required me to be at the GR.
I actually wanted to keep quiet about that. Consequently, I also do not want to talk about it openly now and actually do not want to mention what you said.
But you should mention it, because all members should be informed, at least to the extent that last month 2 times within 10 days.
Yes, but only... So it is to say that last month there were 2 attacks again. That is all there is to it, so there is nothing more to talk about. This information is probably enough.
As information, yes, more is really not necessary. I guess you are right. However, the whole thing requires that you really take care of your safety and stick to it. Stay away from visitors, and also do not go on any trips, etc. This is strictly for the next 5 years. At least strictly for the next 5 to 6 years, and that is because there are other things to do.
I have known this for a long time, but I have received a warning elsewhere, because has sent me the following letter, namely this, as you can read it yourself, and which I have scanned so that I can also paste it into the computer. I will not copy the attached letter into this contact report without the many data and pages that precede and follow it, because it would be too much. So I will only insert the letter in color and what is related to me in black so that it stands out visibly. That way, all readers can see what is really going on against me, also here in Switzerland, which is, of course, disputed. And no one need be surprised that I have already been stalked for life, also by sectarian organizations, and that I have now been tried to have the lights blown out for the 27th time. But here you can now read the letter about the whole thing itself, which was sent to me by, whereby I am of course omitting the name and place, as these should not become known.
My dear friend and dear teaching Billy Meyer, how are you? The secret order of darkness against you, Billy. I have a very, very important message for you. And I would be very pleased if you would also show this document, which I found on the internet and which I am sending you as a copy in a letter to our good Plea-Aren friends and girlfriends, and also show them the complete book that you will receive from me, which I will send you and which you can show them. Unfortunately, the document on the internet is 104 pages long and 63.45 megabytes in size. Due to the size of the PDF file, it is impossible to send it by e-post for you, my friend. About 2 or 3 years ago, I happened to come across a certain official document from the United States of America's intelligence agency, the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, or the Secret Order of Darkness against Billy Meyer. Billy, if you download this document, which contains a long list of names of persons who are or have been under investigation by the United States Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, you will see for yourself that your name is also on this long list of names of persons who are under investigation by the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. Please, my friend Billy, take a look at page 7 of the document you can download from the link below, Billy. Here I am sending you just one page of this document. Secret File Trial Number F2015-00940. CIA Investigation of Billy Meyer, CIA 2015-LOG.PD. F. The number of the CIA investigation file in which your name is mentioned is as follows. Case file number F2015-00940. You can see the full 104-page CIA official document on the corresponding page, where I also give you the internet details. Here.
Salome, from your eternally faithful comrade in arms, friend with warmest greetings, from Live in the light for all 7 times, 7 eternities.
Secret File Trial No. F 2015-940 CIA investigation against Billy Meyer CIA 2015 LOG. PDF. Case open case number 28 January 2015 F 2015 to 924 operati on paperclip. 28 January 2015 F 2015 minus 925 January March 2015 OPRITO and paperclip John Bross's review of the man W. Pick up the secrets. Richard Helms and the CIA records concerning the interrogation, torture, and murder of William Francis Buckley, all documents on UFOs classified top secret and code word for incorporation into National Intel estimates for NSC efforts at tracking the American Home Economics Association AHIA. CIA World Factbook 8 July 1947 photograph of Brigadier General Roger M. Ramey records regarding the treatment of hospitalized patients in Walson Army Hospital by Dr. Harold A. Abramson, and privacy-specific information on the treatment Stephen Ralph Listwell was personally given by operati on paperclip Dr. Harold A. Abramson, Raphael B. Cruz, Church of the Nazarene denomination. Pickens Memorial Church of the Nazarene. FBI files on former Congressman Samuel Dickstein, FOIA request F 2013-1031, and all material released in response to the request.
29. January 2015 F 2015-0940. Billy Edward Albert Meyer / Billy Meyer-Plieren investigation or operation 1970s and 1980s. FOIA F 2013-1909 and all materials released in response to the request. FOIA F 2013 to 2265 and all materials released in response to the request. FOIA F 2013-1158 and all materials released in response to the request. Formation of In-Q-Tel and financial records of money invested to In-Q-Tel and its performance from 1999 to 2014 and relationship between CIA and In-Q-Tel. Any and all records that were prepared, received, transmitted, collected and / or maintained by the Central Intelligence Agency mentioning or referring to the Sony Pictures movie The Interview hereinafter The Interview. Abdul Hakim Mujahid Muhammad, also known as Carlos Leon Bledsoe. Chinese military or construction activity in the Spratly Island chain in the South China Sea. 2000 present. Crest Docks Re. Soviet buildup against China 1969. Crest Dock. Trial reveals S. Africa's role in Seychelles' coup d'etat assassination of Spanish Prime Minister Luis Carrero Blanco. Crest Dock. Carrero's death. A Jonas Vonderplanets.
This is not pleasant, but we will talk about it later because I want to look at this with you in detail and analyze it without you having to record it later. For now, I want to read you 2 poems that you wrote when you were 9 years old, and that my grandfather kept among other things in his legacy.
What is to come in the third millennium in Germany?
The World War is now finally over. But all the people are blinded by it, for once again, Nazism will rise, for soon a new empire will be established, and it will be created in Germany again by the mindset of those in power. This will be, as the future wickedly shows, when the third millennium takes its time. Many rulers will live then, unaware, thinking and acting with blind conscience, with Nazi sentiments, mimicking all that Hitler did in the Nazi Empire with shame. Many rulers will be completely thoughtless, foolishly reckless for war dealings, heartless, providing weapons for murder and evil debacles, provoking America with hegemonic flaws to conquer Russia, as it will be called, in the delusion of world domination's blaze. Thus saw Spath, the wise. Thus he said how the German government fails in its guidance. Repetition is demanded. What a mockery. As it was in Hiroshima and Nagasaki before, a mad clown in a frenzy of war incitement will urge state leaders to plan for revenge, to fulfill hatred, and a sick mind is madness lacking any clear sense. But it will come in the third millennium, starting soon in the near future, shuddering only for all Nazi-minded in government who, due to ignorance and minimal thought, will then be incapable and foolish for proper action, lacking reason, making them blind to understanding. This will be, according to Spath, when in Germany many rulers in the new millennium and the rulers will be unwittingly listening. ED 1716 HRS Sunday, the 24th of November 1946.
What will come in the world in the third millennium?
The Third World War has now ended with 65 million dead. But everything is just a false peace. The people of Earth will be blinded. For once again, the evil Nazism will rise in the new millennium. Soon a neo-Nazi mindset will be established in state leadership and greedily in America, as well as again in Germany truly created by the mindset of those in power. And it will effectively come as the distant future wickedly shows, because even in this and the third millennium, the thirst for war increases, especially led by greedy America with lies and deceit, completely heartless, very badly fueled by the desire for world domination. And America will wage evil war in Eastern Europe through the coming Russia, as a successor to the Soviet Union, in the neighboring country, to satisfy its insidious desire for world domination in this way. With the help of Germany's vile arms deliveries, peace will be granted, delivered fearfully to the war-torn country before America, which will prolong the war and lead to much destruction. But soon America will begin in its toxic desire for world domination with further intrigues and wars around the world, and in evil delusion it will play the role of world police, without any mercy. And this will be as it has always been since America exists, and forever, and it will come in the next years, but peace will never come. Yet many leaders around the world will live then, unaware, not thinking, maliciously, and always acting with blind conscience, with Nazi sentiments, mimicking everything that happened in the Nazi Empire as it did in America. What a disgrace. Nazi sentiments, lurking underground without their knowledge among many rulers in the new millennium in Germany, will lead them to be aggressive regarding enmity, lack of peace, and negative leadership of the people, thus dividing them in dissatisfaction and views due to the shock. Many rulers will follow America's wishes, completely thoughtless, foolishly participating in global war dealings, utterly heartless, biased, foolish, primitive, supplying weapons for murder to the evil debacle, for wars that America insidiously provokes with hegemonic flaws, to conquer the coming Russia, as it will be called in the future, insidiously evil, as the delusion of the desire for world domination burns. Thus saw Spath, the wise, and I. Therefore, it must be said now, and also because the German government will fail in its guidance in the future. When inevitably in the new millennium in the third decade comes, that the Nazi-minded in leadership provoke war as desired, for they will be confused and in cowardice and fear, devoid of reason, where the lack of reason will bring them great and severe pain. This is demanded secretly and greedily by America. What a mockery. Criminally wise, as it was in Hiroshima and Nagasaki before, when a clown in Eastern Europe, living in a frenzy of war incitement, will call on state leaders to beg for arms deliveries in America's plan, to fulfill the war and the delusion of America's sick mind, as well as the madness of American leadership, which will lack clear sense. And a U.S. government will come in the third millennium, which will begin to terrorize the whole world absurdly absurd, in megalomania due to its stupidity and minimal thought, resulting only in a farce and a wicked smear. Many future rulers will be foolish and blind to proper action. They will lack reason and therefore be devoid of understanding. This will be, according to Sfath and me, when in Germany and the world in the coming millennium wisdom will be demanded as payment. Leaders will then be horrified by Nazi sentiments and stupidity, and they will be struck hard by words of hatred without pause. Edie, 2316 HRS, Sunday, the 24th of November 1946.
Yes, what you read to me, I remember that, and what you just read to me. Those were the two I wrote back in the 1940s, one of which I received years ago from Sim Yase, who brought it to me. Back then, when I wrote the poems, it was on this very day when the evil and murderous beginning of the Indochina War had just started in Vietnam, which the French had begun with a shootout and had already killed many thousands of independence fighters, and there were effectively thousands with this attack. So it was a mass murder without equal, a war crime for which France was never held accountable, as is always the case when the strongest kill. At the time, their leader was Ho Chi Minh, while in France, if I remember correctly, there was only a provisional government. What I remember well is that I wrote several such poems as a boy back then, because I often traveled with your grandfather Sfath, and in addition to many horrific things that happened during the war, I also saw many things that happened in the future, are happening now and will happen in the future, which is why I also know what will result from what is happening now. Also what will result from the Ukraine war. But those idiots and idiots of governments, namely those who suffer from a Nazi mindset, like the mass murderer Netanyahu in Israel, and in their low intelligence cannot even realize this, and therefore do not know that they are real Nazis, suffer from megalomania and hatred without actually knowing why. Consequently, they also do not understand that as descendants of Nazis they have adopted their mindset, cowardice and fear, and are now unconsciously bringing it to bear. In addition, they are influenced by the lousy American war-mongering, which also influences and infects many rulers of other states, and as a result, they build up their military armies in cowardice and fear at the horrendous cost of billions of people's money. As a result, they provoke a mood of war and fear in the people, as well as hatred against the alleged enemies, in the case of Europe, of course against Russia and thus against Putin, who is controlled in the background by, like Zelensky by America, and Netanyahu by like-minded people, but this is concealed in all press reports. This is because everything is presented in a biased way and the truth is concealed, as is the case in the Ukraine war and the Gaza war. For example, as only the Ukrainian side reports on the deaths, destruction and war crimes committed by the Russian army, but practically all the war crimes committed by the Ukrainian army with its very numerous mercenaries, also some from Switzerland, are concealed. I am thinking of what I was able to see when I traveled to Ukraine with your help, and saw how the Ukrainian military shot and literally mowed down, or slaughtered a whole series of compatriots, which was then blamed on the Russians, namely that they had done it. But that does not mean that I think more highly of Putin, because for me every warlord is a mass murderer. Because for a human being who is inherently endowed with good sense and also reason, but who shamefully abuses them for whatever reason, this is not only inhumane, but first and foremost criminal. This, no matter what he or she is called and what profession and position is held.
Back in the 1940s, you actually wrote several poems like this as a boy, in addition to everything else you wrote. I also saw that in my grandfather's annals, and it made me marvel.
Yes, I wrote a lot back then, but no newspaper was prepared to publish my works. Of course, I know that my poems were probably quite clumsy, but I tried to the best of my ability to make clear what was and what would be and what would happen in the future. I also wrote several articles, but they were stolen from under my school desk several times and given to the teaching staff, who beat me up miserably with the help of the sectarian Horiton. But that is in the past and no longer important. Instead, the subject matter should be the opposite of today, namely what is happening in the world now. especially with regard to those who are simple-minded rulers, who in their roaring stupidity do not know and cannot realize that they have a Nazi mindset, and in their low intelligence of not thinking and in their degenerate mindset cannot realize that the desire for war is burning within them. Consequently, their military and that of Russia are waging murderous wars in Ukraine, just as the Israelis are in the Gaza Strip. And none of these peoples is smart, clever, or willing, especially not the rulers and rulers of the world, to stop this madness and put an end to it once and for all, so that war is never waged again and peace prevails worldwide. Instead, however, most of humanity, and above all, an absolutely and completely irresponsible part of all those in power, are giving free rein to their Nazi mentality. They terrorize their own peoples with ever new laws, regulations, rules, prohibitions, directives and so-called legal systems, etc., as a result of which citizens are no longer even allowed to do what is correct and necessary to preserve nature and its fauna and flora because, stupidly, everything that should be done correctly and necessarily to preserve nature and its fauna and flora in terms of their biodiversity is prohibited by law. This kind of nonsense is unleashed, for example, by many ill-thinking members of the authorities and learned foresters and sections of the population banning plants that would absorb a lot of CO2, or that are foreign and do the same. However, various plants are mendaciously labeled as invasive or rampant, which are supposed to spread among the fauna. In truth, however, only a few of these are really invasive and would not be valuable for the flora and would not enrich it, especially with regard to climate change, which is now here and requires a more heat-resistant flora. But back to the Nazi mindset of the war-mongering fanatics of all states on Earth, who do not even know why their mindset is labeled Nazi-like, if only because they do not understand that they have a Nazi mindset. So let it be explained to these lowly intelligent people that Nazi is the mindset of National Socialism, which began on 30th January 1933 with the appointment of Hitler as Reich Chancellor and brought about the last World War. Consequently, the Nazi mindset was only geared towards war, murder, and destruction. Consequently, since then, human beings who are in favor of war, murder and destruction, etc., or who provide any kind of assistance to war, murder, and destruction, such as by supplying weapons of any kind, donating money, etc., are referred to as having Nazi sentiments. And these are in any case just as guilty of murder as those who use them and murder with them, as those who order this and have it carried out, whether by war, sabotage, execution, or otherwise. The Nazi War or the Last World War, which in truth was already the third and the first, is recorded in the annals as only a 7-year war, ended on 8th May 1945 with the absolutely unconditional surrender of the murderous and criminal Nazi Wehrmacht to the Allies and their allies. The truth is that Adolf Hitler, as a foreigner, that is to say a non-German, was granted dictatorship by the Germans, which led to a horrific world war, because Hitler unleashed war criminality the likes of which had never before been seen on Earth. He was a mass murderer without equal, but the German people promised him the helm of government or dictatorship over Germany so that he could seize full dictatorial might. As a result, he launched the Nazi World War. A horrific world war with genocidal behavior that claimed more than 76 million lives, according to Svath's records. And again, there is war in some places on Earth, as in Ukraine and the Gaza Strip, whereby in Ukraine America is secretly behind it, directing and animating the clown Zelensky, so that the lowly intelligent and simple-minded of the Nazi-minded of other states, mainly Germany, supply weapons and money to him. This will allow the war to continue as long as the brainwashed idiots and irresponsible firecrackers of various states, mainly Germany.
After all, my grandfather noted in his annals that the new chancellor in his low intelligence will animate the world. States to such an extent that long-range weapons will be delivered to Zelensky, and the war in Russia will be expanded inwards.
He did? I do not know. But it may well be, because this current chancellor in Germany is so lowly intelligent and simple-minded that he cannot realize in his illusory thinking that this will lead to... The result will be, and that a disaster has already happened with the welcome culture, which was caused by Chancellor Merkel years ago, and has triggered a worldwide refugee catastrophe that has not yet been overcome. It seems that everything in Germany is going the same way as with Trump in America, who is basically a distant descendant of ethnic Germans, emigrated Germans, namely his Ur-grandparents from Karlstadt in the Palatinate. Their descendant was a son who fathered another son, who then became a father and thus fathered Trump, who is now America's dictator. That is roughly how it was all explained to me. But he is supposed to supply weapons, money and ammunition, etc. to the Zelensky, as is also done to Netanyahu in Israel. In this way, the war fanatic Zelensky can indulge his passion in Ukraine and show himself off as a warlord. As a result, the war will and can continue as long as the brainwashed idiots and irresponsible firecrackers of many different countries, especially Germany, continue to supply weapons and money, and the war fanatic Zelensky can indulge his passion and make himself look like a warlord. This is due to the unbelievable simple-mindedness of the arms suppliers, so that he can continue to wage war against Russia and survive. Putin is sitting there, partly directed from behind, but also spreading murder and destruction, just as death, ruin and destruction are being spread in the Gaza Strip and the Middle East, under the command of the mass murderer Netanyahu, who wants to carry out genocide in his hate fanaticism against the Arabs, with all the anti-Palestinian military helping him mercilessly, murderously, and vehemently without consideration and shooting men, women, and children without equal. And the fact is that the more human beings on Earth step on each other's toes, and the greater the overpopulation, the more quarreling, strife, hatred, enmity, and war there will be. And this will continue as long as the Earth human being is not reduced to a level that, as your grandfather Svath explained to me, should not exceed 500 million human beings.
To that he listed the same thing in his annals. But to what you said, I want to say that all these mass murderers are conscienceless dictators. Just as in America, President Trump is also nothing other than a dictator and a basic example of imitators of state leaders. Examples of this are already emerging in Germany, where thoughts of reform are already being voiced and a comprehensive overhaul of the order is being planned. Unpleasant developments are also taking place in Switzerland, where the Swiss people's right to vote is being disregarded and circumvented by the Federal Council, contrary to all constitutional law, by negotiating and concluding treaties with the European Union, which you describe as a dictatorship and, which is also in fact one, that are in no wise legal and over which the people should have a democratic say through elections. The same thing is happening in France, where the Nazi-minded president is effectively playing a dictatorial role, which is tolerated by the majority of the people. This is just as true in other states and is tolerated by every single nation without objection, and nothing is done to remedy these evils. The majority of peoples around the world are indifferent and irresponsible, and do not pay any wise attention to the correct functioning of all governance. We have been observing and investigating this for years, and have also noticed that Earth humans are being increasingly restricted in their freedom by the state leaders, and that the state powers are increasingly curtailing their basic rights.
Well, what are you going to do about it if the indifference and irresponsibility of the people is encouraged, and consequently the rulers can do what they want? The fact that these rulers are still elected by the people without them being able to judge those they elect because they lack the ability to judge is unfortunately the greatest evil. Only those who instigate war and are generally unfit to lead the people could be quickly and unceremoniously removed from power before they are unleashed on humanity and can wreak havoc. The nations should simply arrest such elements and then lock them away before they can cause mischief. This would be absolutely possible if the nations finally took responsibility as they should. These murderous elements, who are hostile to human beings and also murderous, should, if there was no other way, fight out their quarrels, etc. themselves and personally against each other. Thus all peoples, instead of being indifferent, simple-minded, and irresponsible, should not elect those who govern wrongly, and should first endeavor to recognize those in their essence whom they wish to put forward as leaders of the people. This can also prevent elements from coming into government who supply weapons against other peoples, or order and give orders to conscienceless and mass murderers to exterminate masses of human beings, or become mass murderers themselves. The very fact that such elements come to power should be prevented, and if they are wrongly elected, they should be removed. However, as these power-hungry and mass murderer elements are not confronted by the people, they continue with their recommendations and feel powerful, great, and clever in their simple-mindedness, and are never called to account for it. However, it is not possible for the peoples, because they are pseudo-thinkers, that is to say believers in God, to recognize that thousands of human beings are being murdered in war through their own fault. This also applies to Ukraine and Zelensky, and Netanyahu in Israel, who are supported with money, weapons, ammunition, and insane partisan approval, which means that neither in Ukraine nor in the Gaza Strip does the war, and all killing and destruction stop. The idiots of those in power with a Nazi mindset, who make a mockery of those who do not want to supply weapons, etc. to Zelensky and Netanyahu, are to blame for the fact that the wars continue and never end. In Germany, it is even the case that the Nazi-minded political party that wants peace with Russia and does not want to supply weapons to Zelensky is being made a pig and should be banned. In their simple-mindedness, the Nazi rulers are striving for another world war without being able to think that far in their low intelligence and without realizing that they have already pushed this far ahead and created evil enmity and encouraged practically all European states to do the same. At least that is what the German Nazi-minded political parties have come up with, as a result of which it is already beginning to fester and bubble underground. The Office for the Protection of the Constitution is also getting involved, making a mockery of the party and calling it right-wing extremists, because it wants to deliver peace and not weapons.
And they do this even though they themselves are right-wing extremists. Because their Nazi mindset and attitude towards providing war aid to Zelensky in Ukraine and Netanyahu in Israel is so extreme and irresponsible that I have no words for it. The lying abuse of those seeking peace by those deviants who bizarrely rankle war in their demeanor, as well as their senses, is vile in the most evil wise.
It is indeed, and the fact that the party was banned is probably due to Nazi thinking. To be honest, I suspect that neo-Nazi rabble have their hands in this.
Which we can confirm, Bermunda and I, because we have fathomed this and actually realized that neo-Nazi-minded people were and continue to be the decisive elements who want to ban that party which wants peace and not to supply arms and other war aid to Zelensky, who is secretly controlled underground by America. It is also the case that all war material is not supplied for Ukraine, but with the idea that this will help the war fanatic Zelensky, who feels truly great and powerful with his arms begging in warfare, and does not want to end the war. His speeches about wanting to strive for peace are just lying talk, because he does not want to give up his power and greatness, and does not want to lose it. Bermunda and I have been entrusted with the task of investigating the behavior and attitudes of the leaders of all states on Earth, and as a result, we have come to some effectively terrifying conclusions that show that the majority of leaders are dominated by their personal shortcomings and have neither a realistic idea nor the ability to lead their people in reality. Like the majority of their peoples, who go along indifferently and irresponsibly and accordingly, in their lack of understanding, elect completely incompetent people as leaders. These people elected by the peoples are equally devoted to low intelligence. Consequently, they indulge in falsehood and rarely do what is correct and valuable, but are only orientated towards might and decide and order nonsensical things. As a result of which a great deal is done that destroys the planet and nature and largely harasses, kills, and exterminates the fauna and flora, and also expropriates and steals their habitat.
Yes, and overpopulation and its machinations play the worst and also criminal role in this, which the insane, stupid rulers still want to drive up, because all the idiots propagate that more offspring should be fathered, whereby more tax money can probably be hoped for, and even more money can be pointlessly plowed away, and Rivets of the rulers can sneak even bigger salaries and otherwise still get rich and let wars and international disputes break out. In addition, and the entire majority of the indifferent and irresponsible world population loses no thought. Of this, the rulers of all states on Earth, and really all states, are intent on driving the peoples and everything with new laws. Rules, regulations, fines, and systems, etc., more and more into the sidelines and depriving them of all rights. This in order to bailiff the human beings and to completely deprive them of their freedom, which will leave them much worse off than in the old days when the bailiff system was still rampant. And all this will spread very rapidly, because now AI or artificial intelligence is being added to the mix, which will very quickly bring everything to the point where the human being on Earth is a defenseless slave to those in power and can only do as he is told. And woe betide the human beings who defend themselves against the arbitrariness and do not want to parry. They will not be touched squeamishly. Because through AI everything will become drastic and ultimately a catastrophe if the necessary intellect and reason of the Earthlings is not switched on early and the high development of artificial intelligence is not stopped. Something that should have been considered 45 years ago when the first experiments with AI were secretly carried out, about which Earth humans were not informed and educated. Something that the indifferent and all the completely and utterly irresponsible of the majority of peoples are still in favor of and cheer on today, instead of taking action against it while there is still time for it, just as the non-responsible in the governments are also to be deported, arrested and then locked away in order to allow righteous human beings with integrity and elected with understanding and reason to take the helm as leaders. Everything that is wrong, but really everything that is done wrongly and damagingly by governments, logically creates anger, misunderstanding, dissatisfaction, rebellion and resentment among the minority of those who really think, reason and are righteous, as well as among those who participate and all those who are conscientious. But this always means quarreling and Ausartung, and as a result the Earthling becomes more and more depraved, indifferent, unscrupulous and irresponsible, which is already spreading to adolescents and children, who are getting younger and younger, who are more and more like the degenerate, biased, racist, and religiously devout adults who quarrel, murder, and do whatever Ausartung comes to mind. These are the effects of massive overpopulation, which is destroying everything with its degenerate machinations, harassing nature and slowly but surely wiping out its fauna and flora. This has the effect of rendering the entire planet and its nature with its flora and fauna unviable. But the flora and fauna is effectively the most important basis for all life on Earth. In Switzerland, the will one day bring disaster to the Rhine Valley. This is how the planet and its nature will fight back and take action against overpopulation and reduce Earth humans. Neither the EU dictatorship will be able to cope with this, nor will the loudmouthed rulers of Europe or the countries of the world be able to help.
That is effectively what we are finding.
But you are not allowed to interfere because your directives.
They forbid this. That is correct. But we would never interfere in any matters also without the directives. Because our disposition is and remains inviolably always peaceful, which, however, would no longer be possible for us at the slightest interference, and would mark us guilty of lying and deceit.
Of course, that is clear, which is why we do not have to discuss it and I can move on to those who also have a lousy and also dangerous and war-promoting Nazi mindset, even if they do not want to admit it. They are all so blinded by their beanstraw stupidity and their sham, thinking that they neither realize nor understand that they are provoking a very nasty war with their sham attitude, which, if it actually comes about as a result of their low intelligence, could be worse than the last World War. These idiots of both sexes also include the brain amputees of the EU dictatorship, who are constantly ranting hostilely against Russia, as do all idiots who cultivate their Nazi mindset without their own knowledge. And as far as the war in Ukraine is concerned, all the brainwashed people are supplying weapons etc. to Zelensky. And let me say this again, it is especially all those crazy Nazi-minded rulers in Germany, as well as all those greedy for world domination in America and the lowly, intelligent, indoctrinated rulers of the European states, such as Macron in France in particular, who has a particularly big mouth and word and is also a sneak in the back of international state powers. This, just as Germany and America are also supplying weapons to Netanyahu in Israel, whereby this war is also truly an ongoing genocide, which is all the more promoted by the supply of weapons and the support of various states. This is also being done by government elements that are hostile to Jews to the core, but who exploit the low intelligence of the well-meaning by supplying weapons and allegedly helping them and deceiving them in order to win their goodwill. The mendacious grandiloquence and hypocrisy of the Nazi-minded, whose illusory thoughts are sick and full of delusion, revolve only around ancient hatred, revenge, and retribution inherited from their ancestors, in such a way that their illusory desire can only be satisfied by blood and war. This, fueled by a faith that is not just simple or political, but fundamentally and specifically conditioned by their religiosity. In doing so, their lust for power, false dogmatism, and everything else that is wrong and evil, and other things that arise from it also do not contribute to peace, but to further enmity, strife, and ultimately war. These idiots of both sexes, let me say this again, because it cannot be said enough, also include all the brain amputees of the EU dictatorship, who are constantly ranting maliciously and hostilely against Russia, including those who scrounge and imitate everything, just like all idiots do who, without their own knowledge, cultivate their Nazi mentality and are in favor of war in Ukraine without it being any of their business, whereby they promote the war all the more with their alleged help, and arms deliveries, etc., their low intelligence and mendacious grandiloquence. Hypocrisy and greed for power contribute to all evil, disaster, and all other evils, but never and not to peace. All these lowly, intelligent big spenders force one catastrophe after another, and also deaths en masse, through their stupid sham beliefs, and they do so completely without conscience. That is what I call an unparalleled, dissolute rabble, one that is completely devoid of independent thought and absolutely no responsibility, yet mendaciously calls itself good Christians and believers, and does everything in its power to keep on murdering human beings and destroying their achievements. The fact that the war-mongering mass murderers are still being cheered to the skies, like the military, but especially the misguided rulers, who squat in safety and can pay homage to their hatred and their joy in murder and destruction unmolested, inevitably shows that this rabble is not capable of governing with one iota. But such rotten elements and mass murderers are supported and worshipped by all like-minded people in power and large sections of their peoples. This is also the case with the murderous organization NATO and the Israeli murderous military, which is spreading death and destruction in the Gaza region and committing genocide in the name of the mass murderer Netanyahu. This mass murderer, who is doing the same as Adolf Hitler did in the last World War, remains unscathed because all Nazi like-minded people are silent about it and still cheer him on in all governments and parts of like-minded people of the world, especially in all European states. Something similar is happening in Ukraine with Zelensky, who, as a passionate war maniac and arms beggar, etc., secretly controlled by America, which provoked the war, has made himself financially healthy. It is true that Russia started the war at Putin's command, which was provoked by America until it exploded. But the fact that a professional clown by the name of Zelensky can then act as a fanatical warlord and also as an arms beggar, and even be cheered and worshipped for his murder by bean-stupid rulers and certain sections of the like-minded population, who, like the rulers, are all equally beaten and generally religious with Nazi attitudes, effectively begs the question of whether the corresponding earthlings have ever possessed reason and understanding. The fact is that all the aid, etc., and the arms deliveries to Ukraine, that is to say to the clown Zelensky, who is obsessed with war mania, and America's underhanded collusion, as well as the acceptance of the murderous machinations and genocide that Netanyahu is carrying out, are based solely on the fact that all the lunatics who, as Nazi-minded governments and populations, are crawling up America's arse out of fear and false friendship towards America, which is actually to blame for this and has underhandedly hounded it until Russia attacked Ukraine. And that only one-sided reports about what is going on in Ukraine are ever reported in all the news, as also judged by loudmouthed commentators, but that everything that is going on in Russia is also concealed. Such as that behind Putin is the fact that he cannot simply decide one way or the other, but all the idiots of the Nazi thinkers all around obviously do not know that.
However, you should not publicize that, because besides, my grandfather already told you that however, you should keep quiet about that, which my grandfather also listed in his annals.
I know that, which is why I only told you and why I'm making my points. You know that I only tell you. That is why I also put my dots where it is necessary when you come here and dictate everything to me.
That will be correct. And to that, I will also say that all of what you have said corresponds to what Injana, Bermunda, Florina, and I have fathomed, and so that corresponds to what you have explained.
Good. Then there is nothing more to say in this regard. Then I have another question from someone who wants to know how the tracks Simyase and Asket made in the thick ice and in the meadows were created within a few minutes. Do you really want me to explain that?
I can also do that. Everything is created by sound.
That probably will not be enough of an answer, which is why I will also say that the foreigners with their UFOs probably also made the patterns in the crop circles in the same way, some of which were fantastic, and so they did it just like Asket and Simyase, namely by making certain sounds or sound productions. Of course, all those made primitively by Earthlings worldwide are completely excluded from this.
Of course.
Good. Then something I learned from Michael. There is a guy in America who calls himself Zeeson and is obviously sick in the head, because he claims and therefore lies that he has met Simyase and is in contact with her. Via Florina and Bermunda, I asked Simyase whether this corresponded to reality and truth, or just a barefaced lie, which of course I assumed, because I absolutely cannot imagine any of you having contact with any Earthlings elsewhere without being told. This was the case 45 years or so ago when Dr. Whatever in North America lied about the same thing and threatened me with legal action if I publicly accused him of lying and cheating. Well, as expected, Bermunda and Florina told me that Simyase, who lives with Asket in the sister universe, vehemently distances herself from all the lies of this Zeeson, as well as his lies about alleged encounters and an acquaintance with her, and, moreover, has no interest in ever coming into contact with Earthlings in the future, which would also violate the security directives if she did.
That would effectively be an unforgivable affront to our security, and to our security regulations in particular, and such would never be considered, let alone done, by any person or other member of us Playaran, nor by any person or other member of our Federation as a whole. We are, as our entire Federation has been for nearly 53,000 years of your earthly calendar, free from all manner of strife and free from war among all peoples, and this must not be jeopardized by even a single carelessness or a single breach of our security measures. The comprehensive and necessary security measures must also be strictly observed and followed outside our Ankar universe. And we must also be very strict in this regard, especially towards foreigners, because as you know, not everyone is peaceful. Consequently, we are also committed to ensuring that we are not located by them, let alone that they can get hold of us, whereby all the necessary precautions have been taken with you to ensure that you could never reveal anything about us if they were to get hold of you. Therefore, you would remain absolutely honest with us in every respect, because even through hypnotic or drug influences, etc., you could not reveal any knowledge of us and our universe.
That is clear to me. That is why Svath, your grandfather, was able to do and perform what was necessary on me when he asked my permission to do so.
That is recorded almost at the top of his annals, which is also the reason why Asket, and then later Simyase, and consequently all of us you have come to know so far trust you unwaveringly.
Thank you. Thank you for the honor.
You deserve it.
I do not think so. But what I would like to say openly, because it has been mentioned several times recently and now by Michael because of this Zeeson, the names Pa, Florina, Playa Simyase, and your name Quetzal exist only once among you Playaran, as I know, because they were given to you by Svath, your grandfather, who took them over from Earth and partly changed them. For us in the Figu, We have, of course, recorded these names in our name books, although they have only been used once on Erra. Whether they will continue to be used by you is written in the stars, as they say. Your grandfather took your name, for example, as an abbreviation of the deity Quetzalcoatl, which also means feathered serpent, or precious twin. Quetzalcoatl was an important deity in Mesoamerican mythology, especially among the Aztecs and Maya as well as the Toltecs. Among the Maya, Quetzalcoatl was called Kukulkan, and was often regarded as the mediator between heaven and earth, and also as the inventor of culture and knowledge. There would be a lot more to say about this, but that was actually the most important thing. Besides, I want to say this because I was asked about it. There were foreigners and human beings, and also human beings in South America hundreds of thousands of years ago. And the question that I was also asked by telephone was which aquatic creature was the largest I had ever seen, and I can answer that it was not the megalodon, which actually only means giant tooth in Greek, not a shark, but a marine mammal, a giant fish, which according to Sfath's measurements was no less than 38 meters long.
I am aware of that, because my grandfather also left many and detailed records in his annals in this regard.
I can guess that. But here I have another question. What should I do if something bad happens to me? To this, I think it is probably correct to say, it is never what happens to you, but what you might make of it. But here I received something about mummies being found, which were also examined and found to have completely different DNA to that of Earthlings. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, is an acid in life forms, also in human beings, which is the carrier of the genetic information of living beings, which practically determines the blueprint of each individual according to its species. DNA is therefore an acid, which is why it is rarely also called DNA. This DNA is part of a cell, which provides important information through genes, and thus determines the type of living being. If mummies have now been found whose DNA is not the same as that of Earth humans, then for me this means that these beings were alien to Earth. So, in my opinion, they were probably contemporaries of the earlier travelers or foreigners, or their direct or distant descendants, whose distant descendants have been roaming the Earth's skies ever since. Together with Sfath, I have been able to get to know various beings, as I also got to know Asina here at the center, who was reptilian. One of the creatures I was allowed to meet was bird-like, as I would like to call it. Two others, however, were fundamentally very different from each other, because one creature looked human-like in purely earthly terms, but was somewhat disproportionate, if I may say so, and it had huge eyes that bulged outwards. Another creature was as alien to me as Asina, only slightly more lizard-like in appearance. In addition, there were others that I would actually call human beings, but which, as Sfath explained to me, had a completely different DNA from Earth humans or Homo sapiens sapiens, which are based on certain foreign beings that could spread in many races on Earth. The majority of them all descended from ancestors who had been genetically manipulated to be aggressive for combat purposes, which was done through DNA interventions, so the aggressive insertion could also be removed again if specialists were trained to do so.
That should still take a very long time. Consequently, the Earth humans will still vegetate for a very long time in peacelessness, as you say in each case, as well as kill and murder and engage in mass murder in wars.
That will be so and cannot be changed, because the majority of Earthlings will neither allow themselves to be told anything, let alone given any advice, nor be persuaded to make something correct if there is no recognizable profit for them. But look here. I received something interesting from Eva, which comes from the Tages Anzeiger newspaper and is entitled Having Children is Selfish, on page 16 on the 13th of May 2025. There are various intelligent and also quite responsible human beings who are really concerned about overpopulation and the continued existence of our world, the life and existence of nature and its fauna and flora. Paula H. 23, for example, writes that as a result of overpopulation, which is to blame for the climate change that has occurred, climate change and the loss of biodiversity will sooner or later lead to the collapse of ecosystems. And she asks who would want to put children in such a situation. She continues, The global population is growing unstoppably. We are destroying nature and our livelihoods. I might be very scared. Herbert R51 writes,
We can only save the Earth by not having children. I think it is pretty selfish to insist on your own inheritance.
and Anna W38 writes,
There are already enough human beings. The bleak future in terms of climate, water scarcity, and war scares me. I do not want to do that to my descendants.
This is the article here. You should read it, as I also counsel all readers to get hold of it and read it in detail, and there are various other interesting and informative things to read. The 13th May 2025 edition of this newspaper can be obtained on request and for a corresponding fee, and the address is the following: Tages Anzeiger, Werdstrasse 21, 8021 Zurich, Switzerland.
Reads, this is remarkable.
Then I have something from Eva here again, and it is also a newspaper article from the Zürcher Oberländer, 8620 Wetzikon, Canton of Zurich, Switzerland, and it is also from May 13th, 2025, entitled Without a Smartphone, It is Becoming Increasingly Difficult. 2 out of 100 human beings live without a mobile phone. That also includes me, Billy. This article describes the tremendous negative impact that mobile phones are already having on children, such as the fact that it is no longer even possible to buy a bus or train ticket without a mobile phone. The article shows that the whole of public life is becoming more and more digital-centered, making human beings completely dependent on it and more unfree. This, as I wrote in my articles back in the 1940s, for which I was beaten to death by teacher Frey and the Horiton, because fellow pupils stole my articles from the school desk and gave them to the teacher. On the other hand, the editors of 2 newspapers who were friends of Frey also sent my articles to him because I wanted to publish them in the 2 newspapers after Pastor Zimmerman had typed them up for me. This article is also very interesting and can probably be obtained from the Oberländer for a small fee. That is probably smarter than you having to dictate everything later, or me having to transcribe it.
Leave it then. Whoever is interested can.
I actually also think I received the following 4 articles from Occam regarding the facts of earthly overpopulation, which I think are very good and hit the nail on the head. So I want to show them to you and give them to you to read. Here, these are what I think will interest you and which, by mentioning them in our conversation in the contact report, will go around the world and be read by all those human beings who have just read our conversation reports and are also interested in them. That the insane overpopulation is contained and all life on Earth is put back in order as far as possible. If that is still possible for the Earthling, before nature strikes, takes its revenge and strikes in its own way in such a way that it largely wipes out and decimates Earth humans, which...
That is unfortunately so, but these articles here let me read.
Limiting population growth is essential. Joachim Ing, 14th May 2025 at 1602 hours.
Nature uses a system of checks and balances to prevent overpopulation and ensure the stability of the ecosystem. Predators in the food chain help to keep prey populations under control. Burnham Peak. Every extra child increases the impact of climate change. This inconvenient fact does not go down well with the general public, who hardly realize that overpopulation is the main cause of the global ecological crisis, which manifests itself in climate change, species extinction, and toxic pollution. More human beings mean higher consumption of fossil fuels, more deforestation to expand agricultural land, and greater urbanization. All of these factors are contributing to the growing ecological crisis that is gripping the world. The ecological footprint of humanity is determined by the size of the population and the amount of natural resources consumed per capita. As all poor countries strive for a higher standard of living, the consumption of natural resources is increasing rapidly, and the population is growing beyond the Earth's carrying capacity.
What is carrying capacity? It is a universal law of nature that requires every population of animals and human beings to maintain the number of offspring within the limits of the resources available to the population in its ecosystem. The entire planet itself has a limited carrying capacity. Exceeding this capacity can lead to catastrophe. Nature utilizes a system of mutual control to prevent overpopulation and ensure the stability of the ecosystem. For example, predators in the food chain help to keep prey populations in check. Our tigers keep the populations of sambar deer, muntjac, wild boar, long-tailed macaques, and long-eared monkeys in check. Predators eat prey babies, and therefore prey animals build up their escape gear. This in turn forces predators to improve their prey-catching weapons rather than devote resources to producing lots of babies. Where are the population growth restrictions introduced? The only control ever introduced was China's one-child policy from 1980 to 2016. This restriction kept China's population at 1.4 billion instead of reaching 1.8 billion. What would have been the ecological consequences of population growth of another 400 million human beings? The Copernicus Climate Change Service reported that global temperatures reached an all-time high in March 2025. Since July 2023, virtually every month has been at least 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer than before the start of the Industrial Revolution. March 2025 was 1.6 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Australia recorded 1.61 degrees Celsius above average in the rolling 12-month period between April 2024 and March 2025. In March, the high temperatures contributed to the largest forest fire in South Korea since weather records began, in which 48,000 hectares burned and 30 human beings died. Every fraction of a degree of global warming increases the intensity and frequency of extreme weather events, such as heat waves, heavy rainfall, and droughts. We have a firm grip on climate change caused by human beings, said Friederike Otto of the Grantham Institute for Climate Change and the Environment. The extent of the dwindling Antarctic sea ice corresponds to 5 times the area of Malaysia, including the Borneo states. If the Denman-Shackleton ice shelf and Denman Glacier were to melt completely, it would raise global sea levels by 1.5 meters, New Scientist Weekly reported in its December 2024 issue. Forests and wetlands have lost their natural ability to absorb rainwater due to siltation caused by land conversion and mismanagement. After half a day of heavy rainfall on 23 April, water levels rose up to 1 meter in parts of Sungai Buloh, Petaling Jaya, and Subang Jaya. Many houses were flooded and several dikes collapsed. Dr. Jahana Ermi Jamaluddin commented on this in The Sun on 28 April. Once reliable, the monsoon now brings destruction. Between November 2024 and January 2025, more than 122,000 human beings were displaced by floods in Kelantan, Terengganu, and Sarawak. At the end of March, floods devastated 5 districts in Sarawak for the 3rd time this year, and completely swallowed up houses on the riverbanks. Meter-deep floods destroyed crops in Cebu, and farmers lost everything. Following the floods, WWF Malaysia warns that climate change and unchecked development are bringing the state to a critical point. 3 factors have led to overpopulation in Malaysia: religious absolutism, economic constriction, and communal domination. Religious absolutism. All religious authorities are in favor of an unlimited birth rate. This is due to a misinterpretation of Scripture and the need to increase the membership of a religion in order to gain political control over society. As an example, let me cite just one biblical passage, the book of Genesis in the Torah. God created human beings and commanded the first human pair, "Be fruitful and multiply, populate the earth and subdue it." The point 1.28 point. This command is repeated in verse 9:1 after all human beings except for a single family were drowned in the flood. All religions have similar Bible verses, and some have another verse that says that every human birth is difficult and therefore no birth should be prevented. The context is lost. How large was the world's population when these recommendations were made? You have probably already been told to boil water. But do you keep it boiling because no one told you to stop at 100 degrees Celsius? What happens if you keep boiling the water? The kettle dries out and catches fire. That is exactly what is happening to the global climate. It is on fire. Verses that refer to the difficulties of human births must also be read in the context of high neonatal and infant mortality rates. In biblical times, around half of all newborns died shortly after birth, or only a few years later. Today, the neonatal and infant mortality rate in most countries is only 1 to 2%. China has long been criticized by pro-birth advocates for allowing mass abortions in recent decades to curb population growth. However, we must be wary of making moral judgments based on theological arguments that an embryo is still a human being in the womb. Doctors know that an embryo develops gradually from a single-cell zygote to a newborn, and that there is no single point at which personhood is considered to be achieved. If there were, countries would issue conception or embryo certificates instead of birth certificates for newborns. In fact, every midwife knows that many conceived embryos result in spontaneous abortion, which is a kind of natural quality control. However, China may have overstepped boundaries by allowing late-term abortions. A line must be drawn beyond which abortion is prohibited. What about the argument that using contraception is tantamount to preventing a soul from experiencing human life? This pro-life argument views contraception as murder and is the reason why some countries ban abortions even for rape victims. The victim is forced to be pregnant for 9 months and give birth to a child that painfully reminds them of the rape every time they look at it. The logical conclusion of such an argument is that no woman should reject the sexual advances of a man, whether friend, foreigner, or enemy soldier, so as not to deny a soul the chance to give birth. What about the child who grows up without parental love and care? It will be psychologically disturbed and probably prone to criminal behavior. Economic awareness. The narrow focus on economics has led to a strong imbalance between economy and ecology, that is to say, economic development without ecological concerns. 3 months ago, the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development called on young Malaysians to marry and have children. Men should cooperate with their partners to have children. Childless couples were counseled to undergo fertility treatment to increase the birth rate. To ensure that the consumer base continues to grow and can absorb the production of goods, more births are needed, and for the industry to continue to flourish. Last December, an MP suggested that polygamy should be widely practiced, and families with more than 2 children should be offered greater financial incentives to counteract the declining birth rate in Malaysia. Malaysian travel packages, communal priority. In 2016, the Department of Statistics published a forecast, according to which the Chinese population will fall from 21% in 2020 to 19.6% in 2030, while the Indian population will drop from 6.5% to 6.2%. The Malay population, on the other hand, will increase from 51.5% to 53.1%. These figures either make you happy or depressed. Politics is a matter of numbers, said a Chinese association chairman in 2016, when lamenting the decline in the Chinese birth rate. Fewer human beings in your own community means less bargaining power. In the same year, a DAP chairman said, "Democracy is about numbers, politics also." Malaysians and Indians will nod in agreement. Democracy in politics is all about exercising might to strengthen the position of the community you mainly represent. Malaysia's climate survival score was recently -6 points traffic pollution, 19 March issue. As it continues to prioritize more births than climate protection, it drops to -7 points. In the next article, we will detail the close link between each global population milestone and each increase in CO2 levels.
End the taboo. Population explosion makes sustainability impossible. Without a binding limit on the number of descendants, we will not have a good future. Overpopulation is the cause of the climate catastrophe. Those who say that overpopulation is a myth are dangerous fools. We urgently need global birth control to save our planet and ourselves. Sign, share. Support the petition for a global birth control.
Bursting at the seams. How overpopulation is driving Malta to the brink of the abyss. Stephen Kalea, Sunday, 11 May 2025, 7:30 hours.
Malta is struggling with an enormous crisis. The explosive population growth, due to both the settlement of foreign residents and also record-breaking tourism, is overstretching the infrastructure, straining resources and damaging the environment. With the population exceeding the limits of what is possible, the country is under increasing pressure on all fronts. The Malta Independent on Sunday analyses the main problems. At just 316 square kilometres, Malta is one of the smallest and most densely populated countries in the world. In recent years, the country has experienced rapid demographic change, which has put enormous pressure on infrastructure, the environment, and the general quality of life. A significant increase in both permanent residents and tourism has led to an effective population that far exceeds the country's geographical and resource limits. Between 2013 and 2023, Malta's population rose from 425,000 to 552,000, an increase of 29.9% in just one decade. While this growth is due to various factors, including economic development and immigration, it also raises doubts about the island's ability to cope with such a population boom. But that is not the end of the strain. If short-term visitors are taken into account, the figures rise even higher. The National Statistics Office (NSO) reported that Malta's effective population reached the impressive figure of 628,058 in August 2023, a month with a high volume of tourism. This figure includes 75,324 tourists. In contrast, the lowest effective population figure of the year was 562,591 in December, when only 9,857 tourists were present. The difference between these 2 months a difference of 65,467 persons, which roughly corresponds to the population of Birkirkara, Mosta, and Cormi combined, illustrates the profound impact of seasonal tourism. However, even at its lowest point, the population at any given time has a significant negative impact on everyday quality of life. Understanding effective population. The concept of effective population is crucial for countries with high tourism volumes. It helps to measure the total number of human beings consuming resources, producing waste, and using public infrastructure at any given time. From 2016 to 2023, the population increased by 22%, or 107,506 persons. This increase is unsustainable without corresponding investment in infrastructure, public services, and environmental protection. Malta is already feeling the negative consequences of this growth. Traffic congestion and transport infrastructure. Malta's road network is not designed for over 500,000 human beings, let alone a population of almost 630,000. Daily traffic jams characterize life on the island. Commute times have increased, public transport is often overloaded, and road safety concerns are on the rise. In addition, the increased number of vehicles contributes significantly to air pollution and CO2 emissions, undermining Malta's environmental goals. Sewage and waste management. The wastewater infrastructure, like many of Malta's public systems, is under severe strain. The rapid increase in the number of residents and visitors leads to frequent overflows, unpleasant odors, and in some cases, even untreated wastewater entering the coastal waters. In addition, the volume of waste has also increased along with the population. Tourists in particular contribute significantly to this pollution, especially in the summer months when consumption and disposal are at their highest. Energy and water demand. Malta's energy and water resources are limited and already strained. The country is heavily dependent on energy imports and desalinated water. The increasing demand due to the growing population and the influx of tourists raises questions about sustainability and long-term resource planning. Power outages and water shortages have become more frequent, especially in the summer months when demand is at its highest. Environmental degradation. As the population grows, so does the pressure on the environment. Urban sprawl continues to devour green spaces and agricultural land. Construction activity has increased, leading to a loss of biodiversity and natural habitats. Furthermore, Malta's coastal areas, a major tourist attraction, are heavily affected by wear and tear and destruction. Beaches are overcrowded, marine life is threatened, and litter has become commonplace. Housing and cost of living. The housing market is also feeling the effects of population growth. Increased demand has led to rising property prices and rents, making it difficult for locals to afford housing, especially in high-demand areas. This also contributed to social tensions and the displacement of long-time residents. Tourism, a blessing or a burden? Tourism remains a cornerstone of the Maltese economy, but is a double-edged sword. In 2024, Malta received over 3 million tourists, a record number that has fueled the ongoing debate on sustainable tourism. The North Harbour and the Northern Districts are the most affected with 21,087 and 13,508 tourists, respectively, in 2023. The NSO defines tourism intensity as a key sustainability indicator. It is measured as the number of overnight stays per 100 inhabitants per day. This figure rose from 6.9 in 2016 to 7.2 in 2017-2023. While the growth may also seem modest, it reflects a steadily increasing strain on the local infrastructure. At a local level, St. Julian's, a tourism hotspot, recorded the highest tourism intensity in August 2023 at 128.8. This means that there were almost 129 tourists for every 100 inhabitants. The effective population of the town in August was 30,935, many times higher than the normal population. This intensity raises serious questions about the sustainability of such areas. Policy and planning. Is Malta keeping up? Although economic growth and tourism revenues are crucial for Malta, the country's development model is increasingly being criticised. The public increasingly fears that the pace of growth is unsustainable and that policies favour short-term gains over long-term stability. Urban planning is struggling to keep pace with the scale of development. Environmental impact assessments are often criticised for being superficial or even ignored. Efforts to improve public transport have not kept pace with the increasing number of users, and infrastructure improvements tend to be reactive rather than proactive. Sustainability must no longer be a side issue, but a central planning concern. Malta needs to tighten controls on urban expansion, limit or better regulate the number of tourists during peak months, and invest heavily in green infrastructure and renewable energy. A turning point? Malta is in a critical situation. Overpopulation, largely a result of labour immigration as Malta's birth rate continues to fall, is not just a demographic trend, but a structural challenge with real social, economic and environmental consequences. Malta urgently needs to rethink its growth model and find a balance between economic development and quality of life. Without strategic intervention, Malta risks further destroying the very values that make it unique: its environment, its cultural heritage, and its social cohesion. As the population continues to grow, a comprehensive, forward-looking policy framework is becoming increasingly urgent. The question is not whether Malta can continue to grow, but whether it can afford to do so.
Overpopulation. The reality of this crisis is that without population control and family planning initiatives, editorial, 10 May 2025.
Nearly 11,000 children are born every day in Sindh, contributing to an average population growth rate of 2.57%. By 2050, the population is expected to grow to 95 million. Should this occur, the province will experience increased demand for food, water, healthcare, education, and infrastructure. According to the Provincial Disaster Management Authority, Sindh is already suffering from severe drought, widespread food insecurity, malnutrition, and poverty. The reality of this crisis is that without population control and family planning initiatives, the government may completely lose the ability to provide basic needs to the majority of its citizens. To address this problem, the Sindh Assembly Public Accounts Committee recently asked the provincial government to set up population welfare centres in all 1,600 union councils of Sindh. The aim of this measure is to curb population growth by guiding families towards resourceful and responsible family planning, topics that are generally considered taboo in this society. While this initiative provides guidance and resources, there is still a shortage of female health workers in the province who would also be in a better position to raise awareness among women, especially in rural areas. A holistic strategy should include door-to-door education campaigns promoting more reliable modern contraceptive methods, including medical options for men such as sterilization. Reducing the cultural stigma associated with such medical procedures is a crucial step towards progress and can only be achieved through open and increased conversation. The government should also consider engaging private companies to improve access to family planning resources and services. It is worrying that Pakistan's population growth 2.55% is outpacing that of almost all of its neighbors. With China even expecting a population decline in 2025, the urgent need for sustained efforts to curb our population growth cannot be overemphasized.
Truly remarkable.
I also think so. But look here. I have written a new article because it is necessary, and the time has matured that some more can be explained correctly, because at least the learners of the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life, have learnt so much that with the right words, the correct connections, etc., can now be explained. As a result, the correct instructions for correct comprehension and understanding can now be given, and everything can be put right.
Creation energy revitalizes the body and all organs, etc. The creation life energy activates your consciousness and its subconscious, as well as the personality of the human being, and also the material consciousness and its subconscious, the human being's free choice of all his determinations in freedom, as well as the of all fauna and flora, and that of all waters. Saturday, 17th May 2025.
Creation energy is a purely creational energy with immense power, through which human beings are animated, as is every other life form, from the smallest microbe to the mightiest animal and tree, and consequently all fauna and flora and all waters. Creation energy, which in a direct wise has nothing to do with the personality and consciousness of human beings or other life forms, corresponds to a pure energy and power of creational existence, which comes directly from the creation universal consciousness and is therefore also connected to the entire energy and power of all life. The personality and consciousness of human beings, it must now be explained, therefore has nothing to do directly with creation energy, but solely with the creation energy of life, which activates the material consciousness and subconsciousness of the brain through its consciousness and subconsciousness. This is because the two material factors originate directly in human beings or in their brain, matter itself, so they are material and physical, but are only activated by the creation life energy. And it should be explained again in this regard. Creation energy itself does not create the personality and the material consciousness of the brain, but these arise in the body of the new human being, specifically in his brain. However, these forms, that is to say, the ordered factors of personality and consciousness, are only brought to life by the creation energy, which only brings the material consciousness and the personality to effective activity and function through the creation energy that belongs together with it. For this reason, creation energy is called belonging together with personality and consciousness, because only through these would individuality and consciousness remain without driving force, without the activation of creation energy. This is the effective reason why it is often said that this energy enters the new human body as both personality and consciousness on the 21st day after conception. The creation energy and the creation life energy together always form a unity, because only together with their energy and power do they provide the factor that life can become at all and exist in an evolutionary way. The reason why this has not been explained so far with regard to creation energy teaching is that in creation energy teaching, it was first necessary for the learning human being to become clear and aware that in any case, only through the clear and powerful creation energy can all life come into existence at all, and not only human beings, human equals and human others, etc., but also all life forms of fauna and flora, land, air, and water. To put it more precisely and explain it more precisely, on the one hand, there is the pure creation energy that animates everything, therefore also human beings. But on the other hand, it is the creation life energy through which the actual personality and consciousness are first brought to effective function. It is therefore to be understood precisely and correctly that there are basically two forms of creation energy at work in the human being, namely the first, the pure creation energy, which animates the human being's body, the vitalization creation energy, just as this also animates all existence of all that exists, from the smallest to the largest. However, this then includes the second form, namely the creation energy of life, which then, together with the pure creation energy, activates the evolution of a new human being on the 21st day after conception and gives him the consciousness and personality to function. The creation energy is therefore the only absolutely unique evolutionary factor of the human being, but together with it, the pure creation energy is the multiplier and the actual energy that drives and maintains life and the function of the body as an entity. This, while it contains within itself the life energy of creation, which forms the factor that animates consciousness with evolutionary energy and power, and in the same way, the personality, which, however, human beings shape and form themselves in their actions and behavior at their own discretion. The same applies to animals, creatures, and all forms of other life forms in general, namely that they are animated together with the pure creation energy and the creation energy of life, and they become capable of impulse life or instinct life independently, who is born and animated by creation energy, as he also becomes capable of evolution through the creation energy of life, through which together many of the earlier personalities were already animated and whose consciousness and personality could evolve. The newborn human being is nevertheless completely neutral and unencumbered by any memory or other things of the earlier personalities in their consciousness. The previous lived personalities, who were always and without exception animated by absolutely the same creation energy and evolutionarily controlled by the same creation energy, and who now also animate and activate the newborn human being or his absolutely new personality and their consciousness through their energy and power. Do not, however, exert any known memories of the previous lives of those human beings or their personality and consciousness on the person concerned. The new human being is therefore in no way a rebirth of a previously lived personality, because no human being is reborn, but every new personality is only enlivened by the previous and newly processed creation energy, as well as the previous creation life energy, which after death processes all the previous acquired knowledge of the personality and its creation energy level. Afterward, as with the pure creation energy that animates the human body, the creation life energy that has become capable of further evolution changes from the state of rest into a new personality and activates its consciousness at the same moment that the pure creation energy is also drawn in, thereby animating the new human body. After a certain period of life, when the body dies, it passes into the so-called realm of the dead, or realm of the beyond, which in reality is the perpetual pool of the total creation energy level. That is to say, the realm in which creation energy and creation life energy also remain in their storage area, until the latter has completed its process of evolutionary processing and the entire storage process of the knowledge absorbed by human consciousness. Afterwards, both forms of creation energy and creation life energy change back into the fetus of a newly conceived human being on the 21st day after conception, in order to enter the fetus, to animate it, and to stimulate its consciousness and personality for evolution, whereby the new human being already lives and becomes active in the womb in order to be born after 266 days or 36 weeks after conception. When the human being dies, the same process occurs again after death with the creation energy and the creation life energy, which are deposited in their levels for some time, whereby the creation life energy processes the accumulated knowledge of the previous life in order to then be available again together with the creation energy for a new personality. After some time, years, hundreds or thousands of years. As the case may be, the two forms of creation energy are thus once again present in a new human being, or rather in his or her body, personality, and consciousness, without any recollection of the previous life or the personality of the human being who has been enlivened by the pure creation energy and has evolved through the creation life energy. And this happens in each case without any predestination, because with regard to the personality and its consciousness, there is effectively no need for any connection back to the previous life and its personality and its consciousness. If there is now a so-called destiny, which the human being follows in his acute life, such as pursuing a certain ability, pursuing certain interests, devoting himself to a certain teaching, carrying out a certain activity, or representing a certain way of thinking, etc., then this is never based on a predetermination of a previous or last life of the lived personality, but on the fact that during his current life, the human being determines for himself through his very own efforts, consciously or unconsciously, what he wants to be or become and what he wants to create or how he wants to live. The human being has always been pumped full of false doctrines, beliefs regarding alleged rebirth, conspiracy theories, religious misconceptions, ghost stories and esoteric fables, etc., and continues to be indoctrinated, influenced and lied to throughout his or her life. So much misconception has accumulated in him or her that he or she has become a faith slave to all-encompassing deceptions, misguided beliefs, and many lies. It is therefore absolutely necessary for human beings that what has been explained so far is also really understood, so that it is repeated in other words and explained again in a different way, as follows. With the totality of all the evolutionized knowledge that has been stored over millions of years through countless lives in human beings or their consciousness of the creation life energy, this is the non plus ultra of the whole of what actually represents the human being in terms of knowledge. The human being, however, is generally not aware of this because he has no memory of which human beings or human personalities and blocks of consciousness were previously enlivened and activated by their creation life energy. This is because this energy functions purely evolutionarily and only stores knowledge that it dynamically absorbs, without any memory associated with it that would come into play again in the next new personality. An example of this is an electronic device that has no memory whatsoever, but can only reproduce what has been programmed into it and therefore stored, but which is dormant and only releases its storage when it is called up. And since human beings do not store all the knowledge they have learned over thousands of lifetimes in a conscious way, but only in an unconscious way, in the unconscious of their consciousness, which is managed by the life energy of creation, and are therefore not able to perceive it consciously, they are only able to perceive this knowledge unconsciously and impulsively. However, he can do this in order to mold and shape something from it by thinking. Illusory thinking through faith is completely ruled out, which will move him forward evolutionarily. In this case, in terms of apparatus, the human being, who is unconsciously orientated with regard to the storage in the apparatus and now knows the usage key, can use its value in order to use the whole for something specific evolutionary. Unfortunately, human beings cannot consciously retrieve unconscious knowledge because, on the one hand, they are not capable of doing so, and on the other hand, because this is absolutely impossible for them because in their coarse materiality, they can never penetrate the realm of the life energy of creation, and thus also not its unconsciousness of consciousness. He is only able to do this in that part of the unconscious of his material consciousness, which is formed in the brain of the human being with the help of the creation life energy consciousness, which then also serves him as a memory store, which he is able to use according to his ability and according to his own capacity of memory competence or memory ability. The human being, as a material living being, will always be denied the opportunity to find a way or a possibility to move into the realm of the vastness of the life energy of creation in order to sift through it and thus consciously filter out something stored in it. All erroneous claims made by any saints or other religious, mental, and meditative greats who are supposedly able to do this correspond to nothing other than the passion of lies and deceit or self-deception and delusion, and are therefore not worth taking seriously or otherwise dealing with mentally. However, there is the rare possibility that a life only expires for a short time, or that the human being's personality and body expire, and the creation life energy only lingers in the creation energy realm for an extremely short time before it revives a foreign personality or possibly the same personality again, which has a partial memory of the previous personality. But why and how this happens, which effectively is absolutely more than extremely rare, is beyond my knowledge, so I am unable to explain it. The fact is, therefore, that this corresponds to an absolute rarity and is inexplicable to me. It is normal that a human being cannot remember any of the previous lives of a personality and its creation energy consciousness. Therefore, no human being can ever become aware of the life of or a previous personality, or be able to remember such a personality in any wise. Neither what a personality has actually experienced through the creation energy, nor what it has learned through the evolutionary creation energy. The evolutionary creation life energy, which always activates the consciousness of the personality evolutionarily and also makes it exist, has all the acquired knowledge of all the lived personalities in its subconscious, right up to the first personality emergence and first function of the consciousness. However, this consciousness, and this should be explained once again, is not the same as the material consciousness of human beings, which also contains a subconscious and therefore also a memory store. The human being only receives subconsciously and purely impulsively processed and stored information from the unconsciousness of the consciousness of the life energy of creation. This is in contrast to the knowledge regarding the material consciousness of human beings, which is created through thoughts, etc., and functions in a conscious manner, and also gives off stored information in a conscious manner. This is therefore in contrast to the creation life energy consciousness, for this never releases a memory of knowledge in such a way that the human being would somehow become clearly aware of it. Only through the creation life energy unconscious, something is released impulse-wise, but absolutely only subconsciously impulse-wise, which is stored from the processing results of the knowledge of earlier lived personalities, which the human being, when he becomes clearly aware of the unconscious impulses mind-wise, is then able to use for further evolution or for new insights and for the creation of knowledge. If a human being therefore develops into something very specific in life or becomes interested in something, if it is not programmed prenatally by his prefrontal cortex and he acts accordingly in life, then this is possible due to two specific factors. 1. The human being can orientate himself according to the impulses that come to him from the creation life energy unconscious. If he perceives them effectively unconsciously and interprets them correctly intellectually, which, however, as I said, only have an energetic effect on him, which he never perceives consciously. Therefore, it is once again said that everything happens from the unconscious of the creation life energy without the human being able to perceive this consciously. Consequently, he himself then develops an interest in a certain thing and turns to it more and more and practically determines everything for himself in the current life and prescribes himself to it. However, this purpose, which he takes up as a result of the impulses from the unconscious of the consciousness of his creative life energy and makes it part of his life's purpose, does not originate from a previous life of a previous personality, but he develops this purpose himself in the present life. This takes the form, for example, that he determines to take up a teaching that was already taken up and pursued by a previous personality through the evolutionary creation life energy, perhaps 6 or 7 life phases earlier, but which is now taken up by the completely new personality and its consciousness through the imperceptible energy impulses emerging from the realm of creation, life energy, because it is simply time for further development in terms of consciousness. In this wise, the human being creates a destiny for himself for something that he will do and fulfill, but never in the form of a destiny of a rebirth of a previous thing or personality. The human being basically creates what he calls a destiny in the course of his life and mistakenly assumes that he is continuing what he did in his last life. But there is no such thing, because what he might do with a completely new personality and also an absolutely new consciousness, which are only enlivened by the creation energy and activated by the evolutionary creation energy, is determined by consciously endeavoring and constantly learning about his interests in this respect, in order to then turn to what all his interests in the current life are, and only correspond to his own self-determination in this respect. And it should be explained again in this regard that there is no destiny from a previous life, but that every interest and every destiny of a human being is created in his current life and then brought to bear and made current. 2. Every human being can create a destiny simply by letting himself be driven by the possibilities of life and consciously or unconsciously acquiring this or that ability and thereby creating a destiny for himself, which he exercises or temporarily fulfills throughout his existence. The life energy of creation, in contrast to the personality and consciousness of human beings, is absolutely immortal through its own energy and power, and is destined to continue to exist until, in the distant future, it merges back with creation itself, the universal consciousness, with the immeasurable pool of the eternal total energy of creation. In contrast to it, the activities, energies, and power of human beings, and thus of the personality and its material consciousness, are technically and electronically measurable. However, the honor of the life energy of creation, with its immeasurable evolutionary creative power, is not measurable. And in human beings, as also in all other life forms, regardless of genus and species, it is subject to the change of life and death, which is not the case with it itself, but its existence is endless. It is the energy and power that creates human beings' personalities and their consciousness through activity, just as creation energy in its pure form brings everything to life. Consequently, only the creation life energy creates the knowledge that the human being creates through its energy and power via its consciousness, transfers this to its storage, which absorbs it and thereby evolves and becomes ever more energetic and powerful, whereby everything is also transferred unconsciously to the unconscious of the material consciousness of the human being, and he thereby evolves. This is why it is also said that the energy and power of consciousness does not dissolve and never fades away. The life energy of creation continuously gathers impulse-like knowledge from the unconsciousness of the human being's consciousness and accumulates it in an evolutionary way into wisdom or impulse-generated energy and power. Everything happens in a way that is unique to consciousness alone, because it is purely the result of impulse energy and has nothing to do with thoughts or the thinking of creation energy. Because it works or evolves through the absorbed knowledge from the unconscious of the material consciousness in a form of dynamic transformation into its own strong creational energy and power. The life energy of creation has an energizing effect within itself, which means that it expands the knowledge impulsively absorbed from the unconscious of consciousness with its own energy and increases its energy level and its power. The following should now be explained with regard to the term spirit, or its original term, Geist, which does not originally go back to the universal founder Nocedemion, namely that it is completely wrong and does not say what it really should. Basically, it is absolutely only the evolutionary creation life energy that activates their consciousness and their unconscious, from which the material consciousness and subconscious in the area of the human being's brain is also activated. This evolutionary creation life energy is given so that their consciousness in the unconscious is active and also activates the material consciousness in its subconscious and keeps it active throughout life. Furthermore, it is to be understood exactly that the pure creation energy is still given, which vitalizes the material body and all its organs with energy and power. Consequently, it is able to live and exist at all, as this is recorded in the old memories of Nocedemion, whereby the meaning awakening can also be found in it. This has nothing to do with it, because if, for example, on Earth there is erroneous talk of creational Geist energy, or Geist, then this means nothing at all, because there is no such thing, but there is creational awakening energy. From this it can be understood that creation is not creation Geist, just as it can also not be called creation universe Geist energy. This is because creation is, as it were, the sevenfold universe existence, and thus the total energy and power of all that exists, and thus, in turn, the factor of awakening or creation, namely through the power, swinging waves, and impulses of its own energy. Therefore, the false terms Geist and Geist energy can never be understood in this sense, because only the traditional terms creation energy and pure creation energy are absolute and correct. These can be traced back to the records of the herald Nocedemion, who lived around 9 billion years ago and fathomed and taught the truth of his teaching, which has been preserved by the Pleiadians and their federation to this day and is taught federation-wide. But where the word spirit actually comes from, this was done against all scientific lying assumptions and assertions, in modification of the original term Geist, which in truth goes back to an earthly language that is lied about and does not originate from the language of Nocedemion. This ancient term Geist has therefore not existed and survived for millions of years and has not been brought here from the vastness of the universe, but was created in ancient times in an earthly language, taken over from it and later falsified into the term spirit. The real and true background of the origin of the word spirit and its origin is therefore truthfully the original term yes, which according to today's understanding of the word in German, has the meaning and definition of thinking consciousness of human beings, understanding and subjective inwardness. And it also means the same in other earthly languages. Geist, therefore, has the earthly linguistic root Geist, which has already been explained above. The term spirit, which was conceived and created on earth from the original term Geist, has become a central theme of metaphysics, which is supposed to harbor the value of a supernature, but for inexplicable historical reasons is also used inconsistently as an unclear term in theology, psychology, and philosophy, as well as in everyday language, especially by believers in religion. At the time when all Indo-European languages were being newly created, the word spirit was not yet known, and the Tocharian or various branches of the Indo-European languages were dying out. The result was the so-called modern Celto-Tocharian, which was developed as Indo-European or Indo-European according to the most Western and Eastern models and as known languages. The term Geist was adopted and changed to Geist, and also given a further meaning that referred to a Heißen or a Benennung, which resulted in the term becoming an interrogative word, such as Wie nennst du dich? Or wie heißt du? In German. This has persisted in Swiss German in particular, where it is used for Wie nennst du dich? or wie heißt du? The other term, however, was gois, which was used as a loud cry of fear, shock, emotion, or horror, as it still has the same meaning in Swiss German today. The ancient term Geist was then given a further meaning, namely by being transformed into spirit, which was used to name and describe the unknown. For example, the violence of nature, all natural phenomena, the aurora borealis, etc. The West Germanic word goizdo for supernatural being was also created from it, which was consequently also used, for example, for ghost and everything else that was still inexplicable to human beings at the time. So it was not far away that the term spirit, modified from the original term geese, was finally used by the human beings of that time, when the inexplicable might of the gods and the might itself were called spirit, and the gods themselves were called spirit beings. When Christianity later emerged north of the Alps, the meaning of the term spirit was once again changed and reinterpreted, as the word spirit had survived until then and was passed down. This took up the term elsewhere, and it was used for the purpose of creating the Holy Spirit, Spirit of God and the like, which ultimately resulted in the nonsense that human beings also had spirit and spiritual power within them, which made them capable of good and evil. This also gave rise to the Latin Spiritus Sanctus, or Holy Spirit, which has survived to the present day. With regard to the proper noun spiritual, something else needs to be said, the actual origin of which is quite strange, especially in Christianity, where the relationship to the spiritual is really strange. It took a very long time for it to become generally accepted and recognized. For example, it met with tremendous resistance in the 14th and 17th centuries, and it was only in the 18th century that this concept was able to assert itself so gradually. If we look at the idealism of the German-speaking world with regard to spirit, then a fairy tale is recognizable in this respect, because the concept of spirit is based on supra-individual structures that are based on metaphysical imaginations. The whole thing is based on a first philosophy, ontology, which deals thoughtfully with being as being, with generally specialized metaphysics, the objects of the world in cosmology, psychology and God, or theology. To generate correct thoughts on this would be appropriate, but the completely wrong interpretation claims and constructs an ideology under the title spirit, whereby the ideology of the thinking consciousness of human beings is supposed to be the spirit. As a result of the inability of human beings, also at the time of Emmanuel falsely called Jesus Christ, to understand many different terms, such as personality, consciousness, and various others, modern human beings invented and used the widespread, completely false term spirit, which has survived to this day and creates a tremendous misunderstanding and confusion. Human beings must realize that the term spirit does not correspond to correctness and does not express what really is. However, due to misleading and misunderstanding, human beings will not use the correct term creation life energy so quickly and will continue to use the wrong term spirit for a long time to come. Consequently, many misunderstandings will continue to arise in this respect for a long time to come, which will only be eradicated very slowly and gradually. So until now, there has been no other option but to explain the values of the teaching of the messengers, or the teaching of truth, teaching of creation energy, teaching of life, as it is really called, as well as the meaning and value of prayers with the term spirit, as it has been used until now. Therefore, the following should be said in this regard. Prayers, it should be explicitly stated here, are not and never addressed in their value to a god, saint or angel, etc., but in their entirety solely to the human being himself who utters them in thought or aloud. Given prayers, although of course one's own prayers can be composed, thought and spoken, are only ever to be applied and orientated in such a wise that they are effectively intended for one's own personality. with such prayers, it is also possible that they have a calming and effective vibrational and tonal effect on fellow human beings who are unable to perform such a prayer themselves, but to whom such a prayer is spoken. The term spirit was used and understood by human beings at that time in the past, and is still understood today as that which happens and is done through consciousness, namely that thoughts are cultivated, actions and ideas are conceived and carried out, inventions are made, poems are rhymed and written, works are conceived and created, etc. So the word spirit resulted in everything being misunderstood in such a way that what should be understood correctly was and is still misunderstood today. This is because it promoted the belief in the delusion of God and very quickly spread it worldwide, and today acts and is cultivated in every form as a non plus ultra of every religious heresy. And precisely this is also still the case today among the ignorant human beings of Earth, as a result of which the term spirit is still understood in the old false sense as that which is wrongly brought about by consciousness in every respect. Although in truth this is animated by creation energy alone and is able to be active at all through creation energy. In fact, as I said, the truth is that never and not a traditional God or spirit or divine spirit animates the consciousness of human beings and was the decisive factor for everything as a whole, such as for thoughts, ideas, inventions, actions and ways of life, etc., but only and effectively creation energy and creation life energy alone, because only these two energies alone are geared towards consciousness being active and capable of being mentally active. However, the fact that in ancient times, instead of the term creation energy and creation life energy, the false and religiously invented term spirit was used for consciousness and its activity, and is still wrongly used today, did not and does not represent an obstacle in and of itself, because the so-called creational spirit or the creational spirit form was not and is not addressed by human beings. Also not today, when the spirit and thus something non-existent is idolized by believers in God's delusion. This is therefore basically irrelevant, whether it is in a simple self-communicative form or whether it is done silently in expressive devotion with regard to a given prayer or done in humility and pronounced in an earth-human sense, because the word spirit has no meaning. Only the religious delusional belief in an imaginary God, because the human being does not think according to reality and not according to truth through faith, but is only addicted to illusory thinking. What is fundamentally the consciousness that is supposed to actively conceive and do what the human being hopes for, but through his religiously insane actions with regard to the belief in an alleged spirit and beg from an imaginary God, he fulfills himself with his own work. The human being effectively creates everything on his own and sets himself a guideline through which he achieves something specific, which he begs from his imaginary God through his erroneous and confused belief, whereby, however, everything he hopes for from this non-existent God, who neither ever existed nor exists now, nor will ever exist, leads back to his own and independent endeavor and work when it is fulfilled. In truth, it is always that which is done or will be done by the human being himself, because he himself does the correct thing and arranges everything himself, but which inevitably only he himself is capable of doing. In every case and absolutely without exception, but never a heavenly spirit or any other spirit. The human being alone is truthfully always and solely animated by creation energy and activated in his consciousness by creation energy, which provides him with the possibility of his own activity. This is so that he does not erroneously and even stupidly beg for something from a non-existent spirit and God who were never and will never be capable of existing. The whole thing only works in this wise because something is completely misunderstood and a delusional belief is cultivated under the false concepts of spirit and God, which consciousness should actually understand in principle if it were thought about thoroughly and consciously in accordance with reality and its truth. But this is precisely what the earthling does not do, for as a rule, he only cultivates a believing illusory thinking. Because in the principle of thinking, the human being on earth is unaware of and unconscious of all this, because he is enslaved to religions and addicted to faith. However, as a result of the evil misunderstanding, it is still the case, without the human being realizing or knowing it, that by addressing the imaginary spirit in the imaginary God, the consciousness is automatically addressed in an erroneous and confused way and led astray. This forms a direct, confused, and energetically harmful connection between the concept of spirit and material consciousness, which in truth could originally only be created by the life energy of creation, but is misused by human beings through their delusional beliefs and turned into a block of misdirection and misguided thinking. The whole corresponds to a subtle electromagnetic energy that keeps the human consciousness functioning in a faith-based and therefore false manner. The seat of the creational human creation energy is located in the roof of the midbrain, in the paired nodal point, the so-called superior colliculus, whereby the creation energy is the factor of vitalization of the whole body, just as the activation of the personality block and the consciousness is given by the creation energy. The pure creation energy is filigree in and over the entire body and thus also over and in every organ. As such a factor, creation energy does not exert any idea or thought processes, etc., but is only vitalizing. This, while on the other hand, the pure creation life energy evolutionarily actively carries the impulses of the function of thinking, ideas and conceptions, etc., which become and are reserved solely for the subconsciousness of the material consciousness. Consequently, it corresponds to an evil heresy to speak of spiritual property, etc. Because since the creation life energy is evolutionarily activating and neither develops ideas nor thoughts and feelings itself, because only the material consciousness is capable of this, and all this is reserved for it alone, there can therefore be no spiritual property given and effective. Consequently, only a person-related consciousness property can be given. In the same way, absolutely no mental illness or mental confusion, etc. can also appear, because in truth no spirit exists, but only the creation energy that animates the body and the evolutionary creation life energy that works in a creational human way as a tiny part of the mighty and powerful energy of creation universal consciousness, which is given out and absolutely untouchable by human beings in every conceivable way. The material consciousness can be manipulated by human beings and can also be damaged in any way, such as by accident or illness, mental or psychological overload, or by alcohol, drugs, gases, or other environmental influences, etc. As a result, very serious consequences can occur. As a result, very serious damage to consciousness and diseases of consciousness, etc. can occur. However, it is never, ever possible for mental damage or mental illnesses, etc., to occur or appear because no spirit of the human being exists, as is also the case with every other life form. If something can somehow be influenced or damaged by human beings, then it is never possible through creation energy or creation life energy, nor through a spirit, because such a spirit does not exist. But this is only possible because something is conceived through consciousness, through which damage can be caused consciously or unconsciously, or through illness, for example, also through negligence. For human beings, the actual creation energy is provided solely by life energy and life force, which cannot be influenced in any harmful or damaging way. As it is absolutely taboo or uncontrollable, unmanageable, unmanipulable, and uncontrollable for human beings, as is also the case for all other life forms. This is in complete contrast to material consciousness, which, if it is allowed, can be controlled and mastered, steered, manipulated, influenced, and absolutely controllable by foreign human beings. This makes it absolutely possible for human beings to be persuaded or oversnooked into something and directed towards a foreign opinion, whereby such an opinion is always wrong anyway. In this way, a human being's personal opinion can be stifled and overlaid by a foreign one, and so the human being can suddenly turn to something else than he or she has done before. This can happen both through coercion and also, in particular, through indoctrination in human beings who neglect their own ability to think and their very own ability to think about things and willingly accept what they are indoctrinated with. Consequently, accepting what they are indoctrinated with without any self-thinking or self-reflection, and despite its falsity, advocating it as a belief in truth in terms of faith. This form of indoctrination usually takes place to the highest degree through the diversity of religious lies and religious deception, whereby countless false thinkers and those who are easily influenced by opinion, as well as non-truth thinkers, the fickle as well as many gullible people quickly, thoughtlessly and without hesitation give in to the lies and deceitfulness of irresponsible persuasion, the hashing out of beliefs as well as the religious deception of their vehemently indoctrinated opinion, and thus fall prey to the beliefs they have been taught. This also happens through indoctrination, which sectarians, the hateful, the self-aggrandizing and the self-aggrandizing, etc., are mainly geared towards, namely by attacking gullible friends, acquaintances, and other human beings with a variety of lies and evil deception, and by thoroughly embarrassing and persuading them with false truths until they believe the whole muckraking unchecked and accept and represent it as their own opinion. They then suddenly realize one day, as a result of their waking intellect and clear reason, that they have been taken in by lies and deception. In this way, many people can easily be converted or persuaded to religious faith or, as a result of their gullibility or forced belief, can be indoctrinated into believers or even religious fanaticism, even to the point of murder, for example, also in a military wise, or for anything else that is not right and simply hostile to human beings, etc.
That you wrote this clarification, I think, is good and important. But now, Edward, dear friend, I have something to talk to you about, which you do not have to write down later.
Okay, go ahead then.